course, Zelensky is going to be angry. He's going to be frustrated. The last 3 years have done nothing but cause frustrations towards him, towards the United States.
Hi, I'm Maddie Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today, we've got a special guest. We've got Bryan Lanza, a former campaign advisor on Donald Trump's 2024 team. So we'll jump straight into it. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
It's been a big week this week. On Wednesday, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin had a 90-minute phone conversation to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. They decided that they would eventually have a meeting in Saudi Arabia, but President Zelensky would not be involved. How do you think Donald Trump can broker a deal between the two nations when one party isn't actually present?
Well, you got to start the process somewhere, obviously. What we learned from the first administration, that President Trump wants to engage. Look what we did with North Korea. I think if history reminds us that Barack Obama told President Trump that he expects the United States to be at war in North Korea within the next year. And President Trump, immediately said, why are we talking about it? And Obama said no. And that to him made no sense to a businessman, because you always sit down across the table when you have a dispute in the business world. And so President Trump looks at it this way. He's a broker between Zelensky and Putin, and he wants to sit down. He's certainly had many of conversations with Zelensky so far. They've had meetings over the summer. They've had plenty of discussions, and Trump's now engaging President Putin. And at some point, he's going to obviously bring them both together. But Donald Trump he's not the negotiator this time. He's sort of the mediator, and he has to hear from both sides.
Absolutely, Bryan, but Zelensky has basically warned Trump that he can't trust Putin the way that Trump has said that he trusts Putin once peace talks. Do you think that Trump basically knows that he needs to keep the enemy on his side, or is this more of a tactical decision?
Listen, I don't think it's a function of keeping the enemy on any side, but I think it's a function of trying to figure out what peace looks like. When you have comments like President Zelensky that you can't trust Putin, to President Trump, that feels weird, because how are you going to end this dispute if you can't sit down across the table and have a conversation with that person, right? At some point, Zelensky's got to put down the rhetoric and realize that his country and this world want peace. And his rhetoric's only contributing to a longer dispute, not a shorter dispute. And so President Trump's position is always going to be clear, and he understands who President Putin is. He's a thug. He's a dictator. He's all the things that Americans grew to hate about the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Putin is a reincarnation of that. That said, peace has to come at some price at this point. And the price is getting both these to the table and having the conversation, having the discussion. And Zelensky's rhetoric, to President Trump, I suspect, doesn't sound like somebody who wants to sit down and have a negotiation. And that's a problem.
If Trump and Putin do meet in Saudi Arabia to try and broker a peace deal, do you think that Trump will be able to broker a deal in the best interests of Ukraine without giving Putin so much? We know that he wants to keep that 20% of Ukraine that he currently occupies, and he knows that he wants Ukraine to not join NATO. Do you think he'll be able to give Putin anything that he wants, or will it be more in favor of Ukraine?
Listen, I think it has to sort of lean towards Ukraine, but you have to analyze what's on the ground. Ukraine today is losing territory. Ukraine will lose territory tomorrow. The status quo means Ukraine loses territory every day until something changes. And so if the conversation is about territory, then that's only going to extend the process. But if the conversation is about peace, then we have a path forward. Because right now the status quo is bad for Zelensky. So I don't understand the conversation of A, not wanting to engage Putin in negotiation for this war to end, B, a real recognition on the ground that you are losing territory. President Trump stepping in and even trying to mediate a ceasefire stops Ukraine from losing territory every day. And I think if Zelensky were in a position where he'd be gaining more territory, that's a different conversation. But they are losing the war. They have the hearts of lions, but this war is being lost every day, more and more territory. So how do you stop that loss? And then it all sort of becomes harder to gain the negotiations, or at least look credible in negotiations. When you say, not only are we losing ground today, and we have no ability to sort of move forward and have an offensive that regains the territory, but now we want to bring the structural lines of Ukraine back to 2014, well before President Trump was ever in office, well after the international community had sort of said, okay, no big deal, Putin, take Crimea, let's move on. That doesn't work that way.
What did you make this week of John Bolton's comments on CNN, Brian, when he said that the way that Trump is basically negotiating with Putin means that he's surrendering to the Russian leader?
Listen, I think anything Bolton has to say, it's always under the one lens that this man wants war at every turn. And that's not what this country wants. That's what this American country has rejected, is his point of view. And President Trump has rejected it when he fired him. So, I'm not surprised what Bolton says. He's bitter. He wants war. America wants peace. And so there's a division between the two.
Mm. Well, there's been a lot of conversation, Brian, the last few weeks about the language that both Putin and Trump use about each other. It's quite complimentary from Putin's angle than Trump. He doesn't necessarily publicly condemn Putin in the way that some critics believe the US president should. He says that G7 shouldn't have kicked Russia out in 2014 when they annexed Crimea. He says that him and Putin have a good working relationship, and he obviously says that he thinks Putin wants a plea deal. So what do you make of the critics who think that Trump should be fronting up with more condemnation?
Those people who are sort of saying President Trump should condemn Putin more are those people who want this war to go even longer. I mean, the reality is you cannot sit across the table from somebody and negotiate a peace unless you sort of have a relationship and a goal, right? And Putin's goal, is at this point what he's expressing to President Trump. He wants the fighting to stop. Zelensky wants the fighting to stop. President Trump wants the fighting to stop. What sense does it make? What sense does it make to start, insulting and throwing condemnations? Let's just bring peace. Peace seems like an easy solution if everybody's willing to sit down and talk.
Well, we know this weekend, Brian, the Munich Security Conference is taking place. There'll be a lot of world leaders there, including your Vice President, J.D. Vance, and Marco Rubio, who will be present representing the United States, and they will both meet with Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss ongoing peace deals and how he's feeling in this time. And how do you think that meeting will go? Do you think that Zelensky will be grateful for the negotiations that Trump's doing, or do you think that he's going to be kind of angry that he hasn't been involved?
Yeah, I don't know how Zelensky will respond, but I think what he has to appreciate is the American president is putting his muscle trying to find peace for his country, and that's a powerful thing. We're putting American political capital, in Europe, in Ukraine to try to bring peace to the solution. Of course, Zelensky is going to be angry. He's going to be frustrated. The last 3 years have done nothing but cause frustrations towards him, towards the United States. The failures of Joe Biden is why we're here today. First of all, moving some of the offensive weapons that were there, before the start of the war, not giving Ukraine the necessary weapons they needed to advance and succeed in this war, and delay after shipment of military equipment that Ukraine's desperately needed at a time where it could have an impact. Joe Biden did nothing. So yeah, I do believe Zelensky's upset. I believe he's pissed off, and he should be upset. But what he also understands that the president sitting across the table to him is somebody strong. He's willing to confront Putin, and he's willing to bring him to the table and come to a negotiation which benefits everybody.
Brian, we know that the amount of foreign aid that the US has sent to Ukraine has been a hot topic, especially during the presidential election, especially that you were working on, of course. And the United States wants to stop sending so much money, not just the government, but of course Americans who think that money should be put back into the pockets of Americans, which is fair enough. But there's this argument going on this week, especially with the Munich Security Conference going on, that the EU and the US should tap into that $300 billion worth of unfrozen Russian assets and basically give it to Ukraine to invest in their military and so that they can win the war on their own terms. I know that out of that $300 billion, there's about 19 that is the ownership of the United States. What do you make of that argument that it should be given to Ukraine?
Listen, I think Europe needs to figure out what their priorities are. I read recently that Europe wanted to start, shipping Russian gas, into the system again, so that they themselves could engage Vladimir Putin. Listen, I think if Europe wants to secure Europe, they need to invest in themselves more rather than look for scapegoats and try to find pots of money. What's wrong with them increasing their military spending by 1 to 2% more so they can provide more for security for themselves, or even provide more security to Ukraine? I think the pot of gold that everybody sees is an important conversation, and that should get resolved. Policymakers will make decisions, but to me, it sounds like Europe is trying to scapegoat making the tough decision and investing in themselves, and that doesn't make any sense at this time.
Moving on to tariffs, Brian, Trump's continuing this week by announcing that he will invoke a 25% global tariff on steel and aluminium. But during the 2016 term that you obviously worked on that campaign as well, Trump did invoke this similar tariff, but some countries were exempt, including Australia, where I'm from. And it's kind of caused a bit of controversy where some allies believe that they should be exempt as well, especially Australia being in a surplus with the United States. There's cause for concern that this will kind of spark a bit of, backlash within allies and affect strong global relationships. What do you make of that?
I would say look at the example when they got the exemptions in the first President Trump's term, Australia. What did they do? What was their actions? I know what President Trump's administration feels that they did. They felt that they dumped aluminum even more. So I think you have to analyze the behavior of your allies, your friends. At the end of the day, this Trump administration believes that there are no economic allies. That countries serve their best interest every time at the expense of somebody else. We saw that behavior from Australia recently during President Trump's first term when he gave them aluminum exemptions. And what did Australia do? What was the response? They dumped cheap aluminum into the market at the expense of the United States. So what's an American president supposed to do when his ally and friends is harming them and is harming their workers? Sit there and say, okay, we're friends, you do all these other things. I'm going to look the other way while my workers suffer, while my people suffer. I don't think any president would want that. And so, yes, this now appears a time that President Trump's going to put tariffs in without exemptions. But I think the question should be asked, why isn't Trump offering these exemptions? The proper question should be is, why did Australia dump aluminum into the market when we gave them the exemptions the first time?
Mm. Moving on to an even more controversial topic this week, which has been Elon Musk, Brian. Democrats aren't happy with the way that he's approaching his new role as head of the Department of Efficiency. He's obviously cut US aid. He's uncovering a lot of expenditures that a lot of people aren't happy with, especially when it comes to taking money from FEMA and putting it into the hands of illegal immigrants. But a few Democrats wrote to Susie Wiles last week saying that he was a conflict of interest, saying he was a national security risk. And then you've got a few US attorneys now coming out saying that he shouldn't be in this role and this just shouldn't be happening at all. What did you make of this controversy surrounding Elon Musk?
Listen, I think there are real questions about conflict of interest, and those things will be addressed. If it's not transparent, it's going to be an issue. But I've got a question for people. The guy's worth half a trillion dollars. What is he looking to skim off the U.S. government? Another 10 million? I mean, it makes no sense. But what we do hear is we hear a lot of whining, a lot of complaining from those supportive of the deep state, those who believe that the administrative state should have power over every American citizen. They're the ones whining. They're the ones making these complaints. And also, you know what? They're the ones who lost the election in November when President Trump promised change. He didn't hide what he was going to do. Donald Trump, we all know who he is. He is a sledgehammer that the American people have hired to take it to Washington, D.C., to fix it, to break it up, and to restore it to what it should be. And Trump, during the campaign, what did he say? He goes, yes, I am that sledgehammer, but meet my jackhammer in Elon Musk. And he's going to go to the foundations of these things and shake it up. And that's what you've seen. Disruption is working here. The administrative state is running scared. Sure. Unfortunately, sometimes they're less than perfect. But I thought you saw Elon Musk in President Trump's office say, if mistakes are made, they'll correct it immediately. That's a great thing. That's not a bad thing.
Just finally, though, Brian, when you were in the campaign team running his 2024 campaign, did you envision this role for Elon Musk? Did you envision how involved he would be, especially when it comes to cutting down so much government spending?
Yeah, I think we hoped that this is who he would be. We very much hoped that we could utilize him in a way that can shrink the government, that grew during COVID, that grew during Joe Biden, that gave us inflation. So, I mean, is he meeting my expectations? He's exceeding my expectations at this point. This is what he wanted. This is what President Trump promised the American people. It's always hard to implement change in Washington, D.C., and it just takes a Silicon Valley nerd to get it done. Who would have predicted?
Bryan Lanza, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.